Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. Welcome to all Idara community, Washington, D.C., Maryland area. So today program is to share with the community the resources that we have, the misconception about the COVID-19 vaccine, and we have a panel of experts and our Sheikh Abdul Jalil to guide us in the Islamic, guidance, the any concern question for vaccine, and we have expert online who are infectious disease specialists to answer all the questions that community has. So I would like to introduce my panel. We have Sayyid Nasir Hussain. He is an infectious disease specialist and a medical director at Henry Ford, Michigan. We have Dr. Shehla Naqvi. She is a pediatrician and infectious disease. She is on faculty at Cunning City University of New York. We have Dr. Hassan Jafri, who is also infectious disease pediatrics and also has very extensive experience in development of different vaccine and research. Myself, I am a family medicine physician in Washington, D.C., and I have been in a faculty in Harvard University. So we would like to start our program. If Sheikh is online, so I would like to request Sheikh Abdul Jalil to please, in the light of, our marjas, give us please any perspective. Is there any concern for in these kind of, environment, how we can help our community to protect them from this deadly COVID disease?
So Sheikh is just joining. He's just connecting right now, inshallah.
Thank you.
So in just one moment, yeah. Yeah, Sheikh is on. Dr. Saab, if you want to just do one more time, sorry.
So should we continue? We can ask the Sheikh to jump in the middle of something.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, Sheikh Abdul Jalil. This is Ghulam Abbas. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, doing well.
Jazakallah. Thank you for taking your time and joining us online to help us. So we have a group of infectious disease specialists who are expert in the area of this, immunization against COVID-19. And we want to start this program with, your guidance, any Islamic perspective when any of those deadly diseases they spread in the communities and across the world. What is the guidance that we get from our marjas and in the Islamic, rule and regulations, please?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيبي وحبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين الذين ذاب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. In the beginning, I would like to offer my gratitude and Islamic greetings to all of you by saying Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And after that, I would like to also thank you for all of this effort to keep our community and Ummah very informed about what is going on in our world today. Before I say the opinion of the scholars and also the opinion of some of the Maraja, I would like to say definitely we know that this world is a world of test. From the one Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created human being is created to be tested. And the test can be anything. And sometimes it can be a disease, sickness. And we can see the example from Nabi Allah Ayub, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested him with the sickness for a long time. And with dua, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rescued him, and he was treated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through dua. So now, one of the ways that Islam teaches us when a pandemic or trial or problem comes, one of the way is dua. Dua is one of them. And we can see this through Prophet Ayub alayhi salam, when he made dua, Rabbi inni massani ash-shaytanu binusbin wa adab. When he prayed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah then answered him by sending the respond, هذا ماء مغتسل وشراب. Allah said, Ya Dawood, now, Ya Ayub, now that you call upon us, this is your treatment. What is it? There is a water that you should drink, and then also wipe on your body, and all disease will be gone. And that's what happened. So one of the ways that Islam teaches us to get rid of sickness or disease is through dua. That's number one. Number two, Islam also does not forbid us to go to people who are expert in terms of medicine. When we're sick, Islam encourage us, even though Allah is the doctor of all, but Allah created certain individuals to be wasila for his treatment too. And that is what we see when Imam Ali alayhi salam, when he was sick during his final days, Imam Ali, he's a doctor, but he also asked a doctor to come and take a look at his head. This is a lesson for us, that in certain field of life, when you need help from the aspect, is part of the custom of Allah and Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. So with that said, our scholars encourage us during this kind of situation to turn towards the aspect who are very well learned in this. And you know, our Maraja, certain matters that they give fatwa, they return to the aspect to tell them what is the matter. Now, when they get all the information needed, then they give the fatwa about it. And in this matter, the same thing. We need to get the involvement of our doctors, especially our Muslim doctors, our Shia Ithna Ashari doctors, whom we trust their judgment, to give us what the opinion is in this matter, and then follow with this. So now, our Maraja, like Sayyid Sistani, Hafadahullah, issue fatwa in the same guideline that we should consult our doctors that we trust and take their opinion. And if they invite or they encourage us to take this kind of vaccine, then we should, if we do trust them in that matter. So that is the opinion of some of the Maraja in this matter, inshallah.
Dr. Abbas, you're on mute.
Thank you so much, Sheikh Abdul Jalil, for sharing with us your wisdom and in the guidance of our marjas, how they recommend. I would like again to, I know a lot of people have joined us in last few minutes, so to just quickly mention our panelists. We have Dr. Nasir Hussain. He is an infectious disease specialist, and he is a program director at Henry Ford, Michigan. We have Dr. Shehla Naqvi. She is also a pediatric infectious disease specialist from New York. Dr. Hassan Jaffrey is also pediatric infectious disease specialist and also has been involved in research of development of vaccines. Myself, Ghulam Abbas, I'm a family physician. So, and this program is being sponsored by, Imamia Medics International to educate our community regarding any misconception about infectious disease. I will request Brother Jaffer to share my number through some screen. If anybody has question during this, 1 hour meeting, please feel free to text us. They can email us. They can also through Zoom, through chat, they can send us messages. The format of this program is just to be a Q&A session instead of having a presentation, so we can help our community better if somebody has any questions. So I would like to start with our the infectious disease expert, Dr. Nasir Hussain. So please give us your, you have been involved in many meetings and discussions and educating the community, your thoughts about the COVID-19 vaccine, and the any concern that in your kind of opinion community has, please, before we go to the Q&A sessions.
Thank you, Abbas, and thank you for putting in the effort to have the community share some of our thoughts. The medical community is quite gung-ho about getting the vaccine administered to as many people as we can. So before I get into the vaccine portion, I think I'll just summarize what most of us by now sort of know about the COVID infection. This is one of the viruses of the corona family virus, and it usually is found in animals. It is able to adapt over decades to be able to infect humans. And since this was a strain that had not been seen by anybody in the world, for every person, this virus was a new virus, and they were all susceptible, and therefore we saw the pandemic. The virus itself is essentially a respiratory virus, and it's spread through the breath of people, especially if they're coughing or sneezing. The droplets that are generated go 6 to 10 feet from the person who's infected, and therefore the efficiency of infection is very good in some manner. You must be aware that in an effort to try to control this pandemic, there's several ideas that have been put forward. One of them was to be able to wear a mask and keep some physical distance. This was based on how the virus spreads. Obviously, vaccine also comes into this program. The vaccine was very efficiently produced, and the reasons for it being produced efficiently are several. I'm not going to get into the details, but because of the aid provided by the government, the pharmaceutical companies were able to put aside research that they had ongoing for other products and really get down to coming up with a very efficient vaccine. The two vaccines, actually now there are 3 vaccines that are in the market. One is produced by Pfizer, the other is by Moderna, and the third one is by AstraZeneca. The first 2 vaccines, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine, the technology used to produce them has been around for about a decade. That technology has been used to produce cancer chemotherapeutic drugs and some other medications. The AstraZeneca vaccine is produced by using a technology. Okay, let me step back. One of the reasons why this new technology is being used is that the companies were able to use this technology. This being a new technology, the pharmaceutical companies, although knew how to use the technology, but had never been used for the vaccine. And so there was a risk if this would succeed. That risk was basically eliminated by providing them the funds that they needed. And so this technology is extremely efficient in terms of being able to present the virus to the immune system that we all have in our bodies. And it's as close to getting to a natural method how our immune systems process the viruses. So the first 2 pharmaceutical companies and their vaccines used a technology called messenger RNA delivery. And in this, the part of the virus that is known to be able to stimulate the immune system to produce antibodies that was taken, it was packaged in a lipid capsule so it can get into the cell through the cell wall. The AstraZeneca vaccine used a inactive virus that's obtained from primates, and the coronavirus particle is attached to it. And this is done so the virus can actually go through the cell wall into the cell and present itself to the machinery that our immune system has to process the virus. Now, remember, I keep saying virus, but it's not the whole virus. It's a very small part of the virus. It's a few molecules. These are the molecules that our immune system recognizes that it could be the virus. It's not the virus, and therefore you cannot get the infection from the vaccine. So this technology was used, and I know because I spent a lot of time with the medical staff. They were very skeptical. This is a new technology. We don't know what's going to happen, and so I've been able to somewhat explain to not just the lay people, but also the medical profession, that this is not a new technology. It's been around for 10 years. It's new in terms of using it to make the vaccine. So technically, it's not a new technology. Second of all, it's a very efficient technology. One of the questions I think that have been asked in the panel is the resistant viruses, the mutant viruses that are coming down the line, how will we address those? And fortunately, this technology will be very quickly be able to adapt to any changes in the virus and produce the vaccine. So it's not just a more efficient way of making a vaccine, but it's more adaptable to be able to quickly recognize any changes in the virus for which a slightly different vaccine may be needed. Having said that, I will also address a few questions before we go on to request the other physicians on the panel that are very commonly asked about the vaccine. And obviously, the most common question that I'm asked is, what are the side effects of the vaccine? And I would like to differentiate and distinguish between side effects of a vaccine and what we call reactogenic symptoms. So if the vaccine is given by an injection, obviously it's a needle that's introduced into the muscle that does cause soreness. Sometimes the soreness is a little more noticeable. We don't think this is a side effect. We expect this to happen. The other reactogenic symptoms that we do see are sometimes people can get a low-grade fever, some chills, body aches, fatigue, and they last for about 24 to 48 hours. Again, these are expected. If your immune system is waking up from the vaccine, we do expect for the recipient to have these symptoms. Side effects are actually very uncommon. And the social media has reported about cases where people have developed allergies to the vaccine components. I did read some reports where there was a physician in Florida who developed low blood count, had a stroke. And first of all, we really don't think that's from the vaccine. And suppose we think that could be the vaccine, do remember that millions of people have received the vaccine, and this was one case report of somebody who may have developed a low platelet count. We don't really think it was from the vaccine. So these reports that appear on the social media, I think they need to be put in the right context, especially if somebody who's going to read this report is already a little skeptical. And unfortunately, a lot of us who are exposed to the social media do read these reports. And because they're not addressed by any professionals, unfortunately, they become very hesitant to take the vaccine. But I haven't heard or seen any case reports where there was a direct link of any death to the vaccine. But it doesn't mean that the social media has not reported any. I'm sure most of you have seen that clip where a nurse passed out after the vaccine. That was quite a typical vasovagal reaction where the nurse who saw the needle, and yeah, she's a nurse, but does happen, and she passed out. She didn't die. She was quite well, and after a few minutes, she was up and about and doing well. But 2 days later, after I saw this clip, a friend of mine from Pakistan sent me the same clip with the meme underneath saying "nurse dies after vaccine." Now I'd seen the clip, so I knew that wasn't true, but I can see so many of these clips floating around. So that's why I think these seminars are so important, that we all get a chance to exchange our thoughts and address what our concerns are about the vaccine. The sooner everybody gets the vaccine who is offered the vaccine, the sooner we'll start to see the number of deaths decreasing. The number of deaths alone in USA is about 4,000 a day. That's a lot of people dying every day from a disease that now is preventable to a great extent with a vaccine. So I think most of the ID community shares the idea that we are not only going to be able to protect ourselves, but we'll be able to contribute to the safety of our community and humanity at large. So I'm going to stop here, and then I'll stay on if there are any questions at the end of the other respected colleagues of mine.
Thank you very much, Nasir Bhai. So next, I would like to ask Dr. Shela Naqvi. She is a pediatrics infectious disease specialist. So far, we are aware there's no recommendation for children for vaccine below age 16. But I would like to hear from her. There have been reported cases of pediatrics. So any cases she has seen, what are her thoughts are, and quick, I would say just in 2 to 3 minutes, so we can move on to Q&A session. You're muted. Can you
Dr. Nasir has very nicely summarized the present status of our knowledge of the virus and the vaccine. Luckily, the children have done much better with this infection than grown-ups have. This has been our experience in some other viral infections also. So I have found the COVID-infected babies, even 2-month-old, 4-month-olds, and they were tested actually because the family members, adult family members, had come down with it. One of the children had a runny nose, the other did not even have a runny nose. But both babies, 2 and 4-month-old, had the infection, and both had required no treatment whatsoever. So we generally get called, and they have been tested in emergency room or walk-in clinics, and they have been tested positive. And we just keep in touch with them on the phone. And as long as the children are okay, we prefer that they not come to the clinic and expose other healthy children to the infection. Which just brings up to this fact that in a family, there may be an elderly person, there may be another person who's a high risk because of type 2 diabetes, obesity, COPD. All of these are puts them at higher risk of COVID. But this big child who goes to school might catch the COVID, bring it home, and mercifully not be terribly sick with himself, but make some adult in the family seriously ill. This has been the main reason why schools have been kept closed, and teachers who are and the other staff in the schools are similarly scared that they would be exposed to children who would be asymptomatic but shedding the virus and infecting them. That is why the school staff and school teachers are also have high priority for being immunized. And once they are immunized, our children can finally go back to school and restart their education, which is as important for them as for the adults to get their vaccines. Uh, I was one of the first in line to receive my vaccine. I received both my doses by now. And yes, the second dose did cause me a certain degree of discomfort, more than I have had with other vaccines, but I would have in no way declined it, even if I was aware that some pain and some fever was going to occur. I think it's a very important thing. I would just say there are always going to be rumors. This is a manufactured vaccine. This has been made to decrease the number of people in this world. It's survival of the fittest. They made the vaccine so that people will die who are sick. And well, it's up to us to protect ourselves, protect the people who rely on us for their care, protect our elders, protect our people who are not really weak. They're going on about their life, but have certain diseases which put them at higher risk. And all of us should continue the distancing, the wearing of the mask, the getting the immunizations as soon as it is available for our set of community. And if anybody here feels that they would understand better in Urdu, I would be extremely happy to say the whole thing in Urdu.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shaila Naqvi. Next, I would like to request Dr. Hassan Jafri to give us some, the development of this vaccine, was very kind of, in a short period of time. A lot of people have concern how, within less than a year, vaccine was developed. And for how long, if we get this vaccine will be effective, and how this vaccine works. So these are some of the actually questions. So please.
Sure. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you, Ghulam Abbas, and the Idara-e-Jaferia administration and IMI for organizing this, I think, very informative session. First of all, I think Dr. Nasir Hussain and Dr. Shaila Naqvi have already shed some light on and shared their invaluable thoughts, and especially Dr. Nasir Hussain has already gone through the history of the technology. So I'll just add a few things to it that, as Dr. Nasir Hussain had said, the mRNA technology is not new. It originated. There's always a need, right? Typically, whenever there's a health crisis, that usually triggers the recognition that we need to be prepared better. So back in the early 2000s, when the first SARS outbreak started, that led to just a phenomenon that had never happened before. Prior to that, CDC would have their own data, WHO would have their own data, the scientific community would have their own data, industry would have their own initiatives. And there was not really as much of a coordination among all of these. And I think when the first SARS outbreak occurred, people realized that in the face of outbreaks, and especially outbreaks of the magnitude that were essentially almost a pandemic, that you really needed to cooperate. Everyone needed to share their data. So the work that was done during the SARS, the original SARS outbreak, was really phenomenal in terms of the amount of cooperation that came together, and that allowed things to move much quicker compared to in the past. So the mRNA technology was initially envisioned in the early 2000s, initially as a thought to address the needs. Fortunately, SARS, the first original SARS, did not last very long. And that's why even though the technology was initially being considered to be developed for the vaccine for SARS, there was no longer a need to develop a vaccine for SARS. However, the work that was done, initiated for that initiative, actually came very handy. And remember, after SARS, then we had the MERS, the Middle East respiratory virus illness that came from the same coronavirus variant of a different type, and now COVID-19. So the experience that that has gone back to over about a decade, that has really helped the scientific community and the industry work together in bringing these two mRNA vaccines so quickly. So it's not like they really started from scratch. So I think that's a very important thing. The way these two antibodies, these two vaccines work, is that, as Dr. Nasir Hussain said, different vaccines have different technologies. Some vaccines, like the AstraZeneca vaccine, takes a segment of the virus and then it puts it into a different virus, an adenovirus, right? So that's how the AstraZeneca vaccine works. However, the mRNA vaccines, basically what they did was they just take the messenger RNA of the what is known as the spike protein of the COVID-19 virus, and then they've actually put that spike protein, not the entire virus, just a portion of that into the vaccine, and that's basically what induces the antibodies to be created in the humans who receive the vaccine, because they will basically form the antibodies against that spike protein. And so that's why, as Dr. Nasir said, you cannot develop COVID infection, because you're not really getting an entire virus. You're just getting an mRNA, a very small piece of the virus. One thing I also wanted to put into some perspective, like all proteins, spike protein is also made of amino acids, right? And just to give you an idea, the number of amino acid is over 1,200, amino acids that make the spike protein. The recent new strains and variants that have been that are circulating, the one that is relatively best characterized is the one from UK. It's also referred to as the scientific name for that is B117 strain. Just to give you the perspective, out of the more than 1,200 amino acids in the spike protein for which the vaccine has been developed, the mutation has impacted 8 amino acids. Okay, so that's less than 1% change in the overall spike protein. So while there's obviously concern that as mutations occur, there may be a potential for less response, less efficacy from the vaccine, but so far, the vaccines still are likely to remain quite effective. And as Dr. Nasir Hussain said, the technology, the mRNA technology, actually is so efficient that it allows you to tweak the vaccine in future as the need arises, because we know that viruses continue to mutate, and if there's a substantial mutation, then there may be a need to tweak it further. But for right now, these vaccines, they seem to be very effective. We know that the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines, after their 2 doses, are about 95% efficacious, right? That's an unprecedented level of efficacy. The AstraZeneca vaccine, around 70%, also excellent level of protection. Of course, they all vary in terms of one requires a much higher infrastructure for lower temperature freezing, and that may limit its use in certain geographic locations, perhaps in third world countries, whereas the AstraZeneca vaccine is easier to transport and all that, so it might be easier. But these are all excellent options. And one of the things I always tell people when they're asking how I feel like about getting a vaccine or about the safety of the vaccine, and I said, the proof is that I have taken it, right? I have taken it myself. And I think in this case, you all should be reassured that before any one of you get it, your physicians are going to get it first, right? So if we did not have confidence in the technology or the vaccine, we certainly would be hesitant as well. I mean, the fact that Tony Fauci was among the first ones to take it, the political leadership has been one of the first ones to take it, the physicians are on the first line, are the first ones to get it, I think, is a testament to also our confidence and our hope that these vaccines will actually help to hopefully normalize the life over the next year or so.
Thank you so much for your answering those beautifully those questions. So moving forward, so we have received, we will move on to Q&A sessions, a list of questions. So I would like to ask, a lot of senior, population in our community, age above 65, 70 plus, they take so many medication for other chronic medical diseases. The first question is regarding blood thinners, anticoagulant medicine people take. Is it safe for those people who take blood thinner to take the COVID vaccine? Are there any restrictions or any with any particular blood thinner? So I will ask Brother Nasir to address this question.
Thank you for that question. It's a good question because I think maybe the person making that inquiry is concerned about if an intramuscular injection is given, is there a risk of bleeding? And the answer is no. I think the intramuscular injections are fairly safe. As far as the vaccine itself is concerned, there is no interaction between the vaccine, its pharmacological actions, and blood thinners. So being on a blood thinner would not be a reason to avoid the vaccine. And I think there were some other questions I was looking at, that there are some of our community members, they were listing some other medications, but in general, these vaccines have a very different mechanism of action. They are secluded to the immune system. They are not processed by the liver as other medications are. And so therefore, there's no interaction between some of these medications that we take for diabetes, hypertension, CHF and COPD, etc. So there's no interaction. So the taking of the vaccine is a good idea, even though you may have these other chronic illnesses and have been on medications. I would feel very safe prescribing this vaccine to anybody who takes these regular medications for these chronic illnesses. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you. You also answered, like other medication, like for blood pressure, diabetes, if people are taking, still is considered safe to take the vaccine. Thank you. Other question is, some people infected with coronavirus have very minor symptoms, while other have very serious symptoms, and we have seen, very high death rate. I will request Dr. Sheila Naqvi to answer this question, please.
Yes, thank you very much for this. I think this is some high-risk conditions have been described, which include being of advanced age, being overweight, having underlying lung problems, and many of these things, cancer, chemotherapy, autoimmune problems, things which generally alter your immunity in general. But I would like to say we cannot change what has already happened, but we can always change what is ahead of us. So in our community, people who are overweight, maybe this is a good time for them to go and start a life of more activity by going out for walks, watching what they're eating, lose some weight. Those who are smoking, maybe this is a good time for you to stop smoking. And these are all things that we can do for ourselves rather than bemoaning the fact that we fall into a high-risk group. I cannot get younger, but I can always take better care of myself so that my risk factors are decreased.
Thank you.
May I also add one other thing?
Please.
Okay. So as Dr. Sheila Naqvi has said, that there are obviously some underlying conditions and other risk factors put individuals at greater risk for complications of COVID than others. But I think that's really part of the issue with COVID, that when we're talking about these probabilities, it is about statistics, right? In terms of there are certain risk factors that put people at a higher risk. That means that their likelihood to develop the complicated course would be higher compared to people who are younger, perhaps. But I think what something that we've also learned is that there's no one who actually has a zero risk of severe disease, right? So I always say to my patients that while things could be the probability could be 80% or it could be 5%. But for the person who develops an infection, it is either they will develop it or they will not develop it, right? So it's either 0% or 100% for that one person. So I think the fact that since we don't really know if there is anyone who has a zero risk, I think that's another reason why we should adhere to a healthier lifestyle, as Dr. Naqvi said. That's also why there's now going to be a federal mandate on using a mask, social distancing, and that's why, because we all have to be, because I'm sure each one of you knows someone in among your friends and family who in their 20s has actually contracted more severe COVID, right? Just a day before yesterday, a friend of mine was telling me about his his niece who's 29 years old and who actually died recently. So the point is that while the probability is lower for people with lower risk factors, but it's not zero. And that's why I think we all need to remain very, very careful. Plus, as Dr. Naqvi said, people who have mild infection can still pass it on to someone else who's higher risk and can develop much more severe disease. So thank you.
Thank you, Brother Hassan Jafri. So I will just follow up the same kind of online. So, the COVID vaccine has not been approved for children aged less than 16 years. So we also see people have some other, medication allergies, some other allergic reaction history. So I will ask Brother Hassan Jafri to address this in case, in coming months, there's a vaccine approved for children. So who can get if they have any allergies, and who cannot get because of history of some allergies?
So of course, this is an area that continues to develop. First of all, I think the trials in children under 16 have to be conducted because right now these vaccines are only available under emergency use authorization, so they cannot be administered to anyone below the age level in the United States, right? They're not available. But one of the things with regards to the history of allergies, we know that there has been reported cases of very rare anaphylactic reactions, right? They have been, of course, and this is where I think, as Dr. Nasir Hussain and Dr. Shahla said, we need to separate facts from the myth as well as the disinformation, because what we've learned is that the likelihood of these complications is much greater, or the risk is much greater in people who have a prior history of anaphylactic reaction or a serious allergic reaction to some individuals. The first few cases that were reported of when vaccination was started in UK were people who were then later on identified to be carrying EpiPens with them based on their prior history of allergic reactions to other things, not to the COVID vaccine. So I think that's one of the things that the CDC is now actually also saying, for people who do have that type of a history, you obviously have to balance the risk and benefit, right? And I think one of the ways that you want to do is that, first of all, you want to make sure that people with that type of history, even if they don't get vaccinated initially because of the potential risk, that people around them hopefully will get vaccinated, so they reduce the risk of exposure to those people. The other thing that the CDC is talking about, that if someone is, say, in healthcare or some other type of work that increases their likelihood of getting exposed to COVID, right, much greater than someone who's working from home, that they perhaps work with an allergist to determine exactly what is the extent of the allergy. The other thing that has also been shared is that polyethylene glycol, which is a part of polysorbate, that anyone who has a known history to polysorbate or polyethylene glycol should also avoid getting the vaccine. But this is actually, if you truly look at people who have these types of histories, it's a very rare thing. But for majority of the people, it's not something that would be of concern.
Thank you so much. I would like to ask you another question to Dr. Shahla Naqvi. If one gets the vaccine, can they still be carrier of the virus?
It's a good question, but I want to say something else, which is I want to carry up with the conversation which has just been held, that whenever we give a vaccine, we take the risk and benefit ratio. That is, there are some people for whom the risk of the disease is so high that the small amount of risk that the vaccine may pose is worthwhile taking. So that is why, although plans for of testing the vaccine in children are there, at this moment, most infectious disease people feel that the risks in children are so small, in spite of the rare occurrence of Kawasaki-like syndrome and so on, that they are not really interested in immunizing children. I do not know whether immunization would stop people from shedding the virus if they contract it. We would expect that they will not catch it and thus they will not spread it. This will be an expectation from me. The viruses are not caught and carried around, but they multiply in the person who is non-immune and then shed from the respiratory system. So if he is immune on the basis of having had vaccine, he will not become infected and thus not shed virus. That's an assumption. I do not know for sure.
Thank you so much. There are a lot of misconceptions. Let me ask you those questions to Dr. Nasser so he can help us. So some people think, these vaccine, unfortunately, in the past, some have been misconception too. Vaccine were used in, some colored communities and there were not good outcome. Is the vaccine is going to change the DNA of the patient who take that vaccine?
So let me take that question. I think there are communities and ethnic groups who are very skeptical of vaccines and for that matter, any pharmaceutical product and clinical trials. And there's a history. I'm not going to get into the details, but some of them are rightly so. But first of all, this vaccine does not interact, or affect the DNA of the host cell, meaning if a recipient gets this vaccine, the vaccine does not have the ability to interact with DNA. So it is unable to affect the DNA, change the DNA, or alter the DNA in any way. That is a myth that surprisingly is still floating around. So I would very strongly encourage people who have had that information from wherever their source is to just forget that there's any DNA interaction. The second question was the trust issue between the public in general and how this vaccine was developed and how the trials were done and how it's being administered to the public. I think again there's so much politics, so much ideas and opinions floating around. It is very important that we go and see what the science is and what the data is, and try not to get influenced by negative myths. And the reason I want to emphasize is why we should not be influenced by this, because once you hear something about an entity, it gets into your mind and it stays there. It may be not in your conscious thinking, but it certainly dwells in your subconscious. The subconscious mind is extremely powerful. In fact, I'll go and share this with you, that whatever decisions we make on a daily basis, whether they are very trivial, should you have coffee or should you have tea, or something very serious about should you undergo chemotherapy for cancer or take the vaccine, that verdict that your mind offers to you is 96% coming from your subconscious mind. There's only 4% of you being consciously aware of that decision. So please avoid, or if you have been exposed to myths and conspiracy theories, please go and read up the data. Please try to understand what the medical profession is trying to achieve, and do not be hesitant to take the vaccine because somewhere you read something that is untrue or a misinformation about the vaccine. So these vaccines were made in an effort to save the humanity, literally humanity on this planet. These are effective vaccines. They're a safe vaccine. The medical profession were the first one to take the vaccine, and I'm part of the system committee at the hospital. There are 5 hospitals in the system that developed a plan how to administer this vaccine. We were the first one to take the vaccines. So I would encourage you to be able to make the decision that's good, not just for you, but for your community and humanity at large. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will just also follow up a couple of other, similar lines questions. People have a concern for long-term safety of that vaccine. I mean, in trials, the trials were, 2 months. So people always ask, yes, we know the vaccine is okay, it works, it's very effective, but what are the long-term side effects? And also, can this vaccine be given to pregnant women, and when people can travel after taking the vaccine? Very loaded question.
So, I mean, I can take this question, but I think Dr. Hassan Jaffrey probably has a background in which he can address this in the light of his own experience about vaccines. And then I can just follow it up with a few statements and ideas that I have, how to debunk some of these fears that we have in our minds. So, Dr. Jaffrey, if you don't mind, would you please take that question?
Sure. Sorry, you had asked about women.
Long-term
long-term
side effects. Can
Sure.
the pregnant woman take the vaccine,
Sure.
and when people can travel after
Sure.
taking this vaccine?
So all 3 very important and relevant questions. Of course, long-term side effects in general, what we know about vaccines is that the vast majority of the side effects that come up with vaccines are usually within the first 4 weeks or so. And the fact that these vaccines have already followed people for overall, first of all, the data are still evolving, because those people who receive the vaccine, they are continuing to be followed for a longer period of time according to the protocols. But even the data, which was the basis for the emergency use authorization, people had been followed for a total of 3 months, right? Because they were followed for another month after their second dose. And I think that's where, what we've seen is that there has not really been any serious side effects. There has not been, as both of my fellow panelists have said, there have not been any deaths. There were no serious adverse events, which are essentially a word for serious side effects. And basically what we've seen and has been reported has been the local pain, the local swelling that is not unique to these vaccines. I mean, I remember when I used to get vaccines, growing up, they would ask me which arm I would want to get the vaccine, and I would also always ask them to put it on my dominant arm so that I could use that as an excuse at school so that I didn't have to do my homework. So at least for another day. So the point is that we know that every time we get a vaccine, we get there's a greater likelihood of some localized reaction, like some pain, some redness, some slight swelling. But having taken the vaccine myself, I was actually very pleasantly surprised. I hardly actually felt anything. But there has been clearly the data suggests that those types of local reactions have been noted, but none of them were severe in nature. So I think that's really one thing. And as far as how long is the duration, I think that's the part that we will all learn, right? We know that even the natural infection due to coronavirus does not give you long-term immunity. But I think for right now, the more immediate thing, when, as Dr. Nasir Hussain reminded us, when there are over 4,000 people dying on every day, right? When there are hundreds of thousands of people just in this country getting infected every day, I think being able to, even if we can get protection for the next year or so, right? I'm just saying. I mean, I based on the technology, I have full confidence that that the protection would be more longer lasting, but we don't know that yet. But even if we can get some short-term immunity, relatively speaking, like we get with influenza vaccine that has to be repeated on a yearly basis, that would still be a huge improvement over what we have right now. Last thing about the prospects of giving the vaccine to pregnant females, and this is where I'm sure Dr. Naqvi would also have some thoughts as well. But again, it comes down to the risk benefit that Dr. Naqvi talked about, right? You have to always think about it, and that's why the position is that while the clinical trials did not include anyone who was known to be pregnant at the time when they received the vaccine. However, from a biologic reasons, there's no biologic plausibility to think that there would be any harm. So I think you have to think about, again, if someone is pregnant and she is a physician or a nurse or someone else who's on the front line, their chances of developing COVID-19 infection and severe infection may be greater, while they're pregnant compared to getting any side effects from the vaccine. So I think these are the things that are individual cases that need to be discussed. But I think the overall the position from the scientists is that it would be likely for them to receive the vaccine, but in consultation and consideration of the risk-benefit profile. Dr. Naqvi and Dr. Hussain, do you want to add?
Yes. Speaking from New York, the guidelines from the New York City are that if they are doctors or teachers or frontline workers, including people working in grocery stores, that to that extent, if they are pregnant and they want the vaccine, they can get the vaccine, because we do not foresee problems occurring just because of pregnancy. I have seen young women who were pregnant and who got the disease, and they actually did quite okay. And they were nursing women who had COVID, and we allowed them to nurse as long as they wore a mask and washed their hands before handling the baby. So in a way, again, that this doesn't seem to be any different than getting a tetanus shot or a flu shot during pregnancy.
Thank you, Dr. Naqvi. I just want to add a comment because I was curious where these two concerns originated. One was this question about does vaccine induces sterility, and the other one was they don't want to give it to pregnant patients because the pregnant patients weren't included in the study. And so the conclusion that was drawn was, well, it's going to cause problems with pregnancy, so we won't include them. And it's very interesting because when we physicians think about pregnancy and these issues, we naturally think that if you're going to come up with a vaccine or a new pharmaceutical agent, we don't like to upfront include pregnant patients. And that's just a natural evolution of how these studies are done. It is not because there's some concern that we don't want to include pregnant patients because we already know there's going to be a problem. So
Right.
it really depends on the perspective of who is looking at this data. So even people who look at data, they need to have the right context of how to interpret the data. We're not really concerned about this problem with sterility because that has not been studied. We don't think these vaccines interfere with sterility. There's a track record of vaccines. So that's not a concern. But when this concern is raised, I found out why this was raised. And that's very interesting to me that people, when they interpret the data, they like to fill in the gaps of the knowledge that would explain a certain event. And that gap is very important, that we fill the gap with the right knowledge. So please try to understand that these vaccine developments, they do not include pregnant patients because simply we'd like to be able to give it to people who are not pregnant. And since these are not licensed, we'd like to make sure that these are safe in everybody before we go on to giving it to pregnant patients. It's not because they've been shown to have a problem in pregnancy, but this is just how these trials are done. And same thing with sterility. We don't think there's the mechanism of these vaccines causes sterility. My contact with nurses in the hospitals is obviously on a daily basis. And when nurses show their concern about these questions, obviously they're looking at messages on the social media, which I've started to request that if you have a question, concern, address it. Check with your doctor, look at the data, and make sure that these gaps in knowledges are filled in with the right information.
One thing I wanted to also add, it reminded me this concern or disinformation about sterility somehow always comes up. It's nothing new with this vaccine. This has also been a common theme with like the polio vaccine, right? That was a common theme in Pakistan and India also, especially among the in India, because my brother-in-law Hamid Jafri was leading the Indian polio eradication program, and actually India became polio-free under his watch. So that was something that was actually, that belief was held among primarily Muslim households in Bihar and UP, and they had to work against, and make sure that they address those concerns. So we know that these types of concerns that are raised by people who are generally trying to actually create discomfort about the idea of vaccination. It's not unique to this. They continue to do this. But however, we know from the other vaccines for which they have raised these types of concerns have been raised, that any concerns about sterility are not really true. One other question I think that you had raised was about travel. And I think that's also relevant. I think in future, what we will see likely, again, I mean, this is where I'm just projecting in terms of how things will look like, that, once the vaccine is accessible to most of the people, it is possible that that there would be requirements. There may be requirement for people to, I mean, we've also already heard about, certain types of events, that people can only get concert tickets if they have a proof of vaccination, so on and so forth. We don't know exactly how that will, because certainly the way the amount of and the number of vaccines that are available makes us realize that it'll take some time before the vaccine would become available to everyone. However, recently I had the opportunity to travel, and I think part of it is that, at least for right now, even though I have my certificate, my immunization card, but the airlines obviously have to conform to a system, and right now the airlines have no way of dealing with someone who says, well, I've been vaccinated. So therefore, even if any of us has received the vaccine, I think for during the foreseeable future, we would still have to abide by the mask and social distancing policy. And I think that would make sense. I think once a vast majority of the people get vaccinated, I think it may be possible. I've heard, and I'm sure you've also heard, certain airlines like United and others have said, maybe in future we'll require someone to get a vaccine certificate for them to be allowed to travel. But I think for right now, even if we get the vaccine, we still have to use the same mask and social distancing, because airlines have no way of distinguishing you who has been vaccinated compared with from anyone else who has not been vaccinated yet.
Thank you so much, Hassan Jafri, brother. Next question is Dr. Shaila Naqvi. Can someone with a seizure disorder can take the COVID vaccine? And part two is, how often in future somebody will require these vaccines?
There is nothing against somebody with a seizure disorder getting the vaccine. We generally give the same advice that be ready with watch the temperature, be ready to use antipyretic if that is the thing which causes them to have seizure. So I don't think the seizure disorder per se, but what the fever may excite a seizure. So we try to give for every vaccine the same advice: check the temperature, keep an eye, and use the antipyretic. Do not let it get too high. So that's it. And the other part of the question was How
How
often it will?
often in future somebody will
Sure.
require
I
COVID
think,
vaccine?
yes. I think this question's been answered actually before, but I'd be happy to say it all over again, that we don't know as yet, but it might be that like influenza, we may have to get the vaccine every year. But at this moment, we don't know. We just know that people who were part of the study and who received the vaccines before everybody else are still showing that they have remained immune.
Can I just interrupt 1 second? Is that you use the word antipyretic? I don't know if
Sorry,
maybe
just
just for
Tylenol,
the seizures.
Motrin.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tylenol, Motrin, anything which brings the temperature down.
Thank you so much. Dr. Nasir, I have a more challenging question for you. So question is, what do you think of the UK government decision to increase the interval between the two vaccines to 12 weeks rather than 3 weeks for Pfizer? Usually we give 4 weeks, and for AstraZeneca respectively, 3-4 weeks.
Yeah. So, we think the vaccine interval can be sort of flexible 4 days before or 4 days after the 21 days. I think, now, this is my opinion. I haven't spoken to any British administrative people, but I think there is a huge component of logistics. And we saw this in this country also, that vaccines that comprise two different shots, two shots at different times, a lot of us outstripped the inventory and we gave too many people the first shot. And the vaccine inventory could not be built up. And we were able to, luckily, we were able to get the second group of vaccines and then get into trouble. But I think stretching out the period of time that goes beyond what has been shown in the studies is always stepping out in a limb. I don't think it's a huge problem as long as we can demonstrate in the post-marketing surveillance studies that even the ones who got the second shot of the vaccine much later than what was in the studies were able to develop immunity and had adequate levels of antibodies. But in general, I think we should stick to the same time schedule that was done in the clinical trials. Why England chose to do that? The only answer I can think of are logistics, because we had a similar situation even here in this country, but we were lucky enough that the inventory was kept up. But don't quote me on why England chose to do that. That's my opinion.
Well, thank you so much. We are running out of the time. I would like to ask Brother Hassan Jaffrey to give us some resources in our DMV area, especially in Maryland, so people who want to get vaccine. I know the Department of Health and Maryland government has put on their website all those, but if you can share with us in quick 1 minute, and maybe also send us an email that we can share to the community too, please.
Sure. No, I think it's. Thank you. And one thing I'd like to also take a minute to by stepping back and mentioning, we're talking about the vaccine, which is extremely important. But at the same time, we also have people who, while waiting for the vaccine, unfortunately, they're still developing and contracting COVID. So I think it's very important for people to realize that the options that are available to us also continue to evolve. Right. Over the past 6 weeks or so, now there is a medicine that has been authorized by the FDA under emergency use authorization. It's known as monoclonal antibody. Monoclonal antibodies have to be given as a single dose, but as an intravenous infusion over 2 hours. So it cannot be taken at home by mouth or anything. However, it is available under emergency use for people with high risk, provided they're still in early stage of COVID, that they're not requiring oxygen, they're not in the hospital. So I think it's a very, very important thing for people to be aware of, that now that we have an option, and it's a very safe option in general, and effective if taken early, that instead of saying, well, I'll see if I get worse Khuda na khasta. Now there is actually an option. And for example, in Maryland, as well as in Virginia, there are infusion centers that are organized by the states, the state of Maryland, state of Virginia, that provide the monoclonal antibody free of charge, right? They do not charge you because it's actually provided by the government. So I think it would be important for people to recognize that these options are available while they take their best precautions, right? But infections can still occur, and they need to be aware of. And it's an area that unfortunately everyone, including the physicians, are also learning at the same time. So don't be afraid and shy about bringing it up to your physician if Khuda na khasta any of you develop the COVID illness. And I think what we can do is we can also share some of those resources as a follow-up email, Dr. Abbas, because some of these things I think would be important. In terms of where to get the vaccine, unfortunately, because of the prior administration not really having had a coherent plan, that there was no federal plan that provided guidance to the individual states. It has been left up to the states, and each state is doing the vaccine appropriation differently. In Texas, people are getting it even if they're in high school. I mean, one of our former neighbors, before we moved from Dallas, they've already received all of their vaccines, including their children. In Florida, they have a different standard. In Maryland and Virginia, where we started off with the tier 1A, which was the healthcare providers who are providing direct patient care, and also residents in nursing homes, right? That's where we started. Now, both of these states have gone to 1B, which basically includes other risk factors, including populations who are above 75 years of age, right? And now the governors of both of the states have actually announced that they have authorized. However, because of the limitation of the number of vaccine doses, there's still not a lot of appointments available. So what we'll do is, for Maryland, there's a website by the state of Maryland. It's called marylandvax.org, which basically you go there, you type in your zip code, and that'll tell you which are the clinics in your area that are providing vaccines, and it'll actually give you the option to sign up and pre-register. The Maryland Department of Health has also issued a pre-registration process. The same thing has also been started by the Fairfax County in Virginia and Loudoun County also, that people can actually go in, they can pre-register their information so that whenever they become eligible to receive those vaccines, then they will actually get an email from the State Department saying, now you can actually sign up. Because of course, if you try to sign up, if I'm under 75 and I try to sign up for a vaccine appointment, I would not be eligible, right? But the good thing about pre-registering is that when I do become eligible based on the information I've included, then I will receive actually an email and an alert from the department. So I think we should be able to also share those resources and those email links in our follow-up emails.
Thank you so much, for joining us and taking your time. I really appreciate Dr. Nasir Hussain, Dr. Shaila Naqvi, Brother Hassan Jafri, and Sheikh Abdul Jalil for helping us to educate those very challenging kind of questions that community has to help us. This session was completely unbiased. We do not have any funding, or we do not work for any drug companies. What we shared is based on the latest research, independent. The Pfizer vaccine, 40,000 people were under the study, and the Moderna 30,000 plus. And every single person I think on this panel has reviewed those. It was very unbiased trials and very fair kind of scientific information. So we would like to say thank you to all our community. If still somebody has any questions, feel free, they can send us. We would be happy to send those questions to our panelists, and we can get your answers. Thank you so much.
Can I just?
And I would like.
Sorry, I'm sure Dr. Naqvi and Dr. Hussain would also agree. I think it's also a good opportunity when we want to do everything we can to stay healthy for any of you who have not taken the flu shot, make sure that you get your influenza shot. It's still not too late.
Yeah, I think Dr. Nasir can correct me. When you go get vaccine, usually they ask you within 14 days, if you have taken flu shot, you cannot get COVID vaccine. And same, I think after that, any other vaccine that you have received. Yes, it's good, but just see if you're getting COVID vaccine first, then go for COVID first before you get the flu.
Right.
So
if you're
I would
waiting,
like,
then get your influenza shot, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to ask our Sheikh Abdul Jalil to please recite dua for those people who deceased in our community because of other illness or COVID, and please recite dua for every single person for the safety and health of the community.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. At the beginning, I would like to request all of us to read Amma Yujib for all our sick mu'mineen and mu'minat across the world, especially in our communities, those who are at homes, those who are at hospital. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala heal them and give them the fastest recovery, Ya Rabbal Alameen. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أمن يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. 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 اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. And also not forgetting our marhumin who we lost since last year and this year, and also today, and all mu'mineen and mu'minat across the world. Those who pass on, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with their soul. Surah Al-Mubarakat Al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Malik Yawm al-Din. إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم. صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. Now the last dua, praying for our spiritual doctor and physical doctor, our 12th Imam. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hasten his appearance, Ya Rabbal Alameen. With him all things become possible. Ya Allah, hasten his appearance. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.